Apparently you can spell funky without F-U-N on Virtual Boy Works, episode 12. So we're already winding down the US Virtual Boy lineup, a mere 12 episodes into this whole endeavor. As nice as it would have been for Virtual Boy to have gone out on a high note, I'm sorry to say that wasn't the case. Hot on the heels of the interesting but far from wonderful Waterworld, we have the final Nintendo first-party creation for the platform, Nestor's Funky Bowling. It's not a particularly good game, but it's definitely one of the oddest first-party Nintendo releases ever, so I suppose that counts for something. For starters, this is another one of those rare works that was designed, in part, at a Nintendo internal studio in Japan, but only ever released in the US. Not surprisingly, the game appears to come to us from the dev group behind another notable American-exclusive Nintendo duology, the Star Tropics series. That is, Nintendo R&D 3. Headed up by Genyo Takeda, R&D 3 focused primarily on hardware and peripherals, and didn't make a lot of games. But when they did, those software projects were almost always geared toward the US market. Takeda created a huge arcade hit in the US with the original Punch-Out! I suppose the corporate thinkers decided, well, you seem to get what makes our biggest foreign market tick, so congrats, you're now our America guy. In this case, R&D 3 didn't venture alone into the strange world of virtual 10-pins. Here, they teamed up with a fledgling studio called Sapphire, based out of Utah. Sapphire did the heavy lifting on Nestor's Funky Bowling. It was one of their very first projects that wasn't simply a conversion of an existing creation. But yeah, it's an odd little game. I mean, the concept isn't so weird. The Virtual Boy's 3D tech is all about parallax visualization based on relative distances. So a game in which you're chucking a ball down a fixed lane at distant objects makes perfect sense. In fact, it made such perfect sense that no less than 2 games in the Virtual Boy's library of fewer than 24 games involve bowling, as we'll see down the road. It's entirely possible that no other console ever made has as high a percentage of bowling games by volume as Virtual Boy. And this is a competent take on the sport, if not a spectacular one. Nestor's Funky Bowling offers 3 modes. There's a practice mode that allows you to perfect your rolls for pretty much every pin arrangement permutation imaginable. And there's a challenge mode that shuffles those various pin scenarios into a running contest. The meat of the game, of course, is a standard bowling contest. You have 10 frames, 10 pins, and 2 rolls per frame. You can choose one of 2 on-screen avatars, male or female, select one of 9 different ball weights, and choose the dominant arm of your bowler. The weight of the ball makes an appreciable difference to its performance. Lighter balls are more likely to spin or stall, while heavier balls roll forward with less variance. The act of bowling itself plays out here with the use of meters similar to a golf sim. This is how it worked in World League Bowling for Game Boy, and it's how it works here. You have a lateral slider to determine the angle from which you approach the lane, and a power slider to determine the force with which you release the ball. There are no surprises to be found in this setup if you have ever watched any of the Works episodes featuring a golf or bowling game. Sapphire stuck to the basics. The one unusual play feature of Nestor's Funky Bowling is that you can choose to hit either face button, A or B, to determine the direction in which you spin the ball. There's not really a roll it dead straight option so far as I can tell. The interaction between button and the direction of the English you put on the ball is actually somewhat counterintuitive in my opinion. The ball rotates in the opposite direction of the button you press to release it. This takes a little getting used to, but once you have a handle on the situation, you can score well pretty consistently. The scoring system here uses standard bowling rules in the basic tournament mode. You get 1 point for each pin you knock down, plus the points you earn in the frame following a spare, and the 2 frames following a strike. So far, so mundane, right? What makes Nestor's Funky Bowling such an oddity, though, is right there in the title. Not that it's funky, but the fact that it's a game starring Nestor. There are a lot of reasons it's really bizarre for Nintendo to have created a game starring Nestor, but foremost among them is that the character had been retired for nearly 2 years by the time this game shipped. Nestor, for those of you who didn't follow Nintendo obsessively during the NES era, was a character who debuted in the pages of Nintendo Power magazine. Nestor was a fictional kid who starred opposite a cartoon version of real-life Nintendo employee Howard Phillips in the Howard and Nestor comics. Phillips in real life was basically the luckiest kid in the world, having been elevated to a position of glory as Nintendo of America's internal playtester at the dawn of the NES era. As a so-called expert player, Phillips is reputed to have had significant sway over NOA's localization decisions. Legend has it that Phillips had a prominent role in the decision not to bring Super Mario Bros. 2 for Famicom over to the US, resulting in the frankly superior Doki Doki Panic for Disk System having been repurposed for that role instead. In any case, Nintendo Power magazine featured a full-page, sometimes two-page comic starring Phillips, which amounted to a glorified tips and tricks feature. Phillips' avatar appeared opposite a snotty little punk named Hester, a know-it-all twerp whose cocksure incompetence invariably landed him into unpleasant situations. Although I guess it's a little weird in hindsight that this Goofus and Gallant-style comic featured a grown man dunking repeatedly on a little kid, it somehow worked at the time. Probably because Nestor represents a variety of obnoxious doofus we've all known at one time or another. In short, Nestor was an unlikable, toxic little shit who only worked because he existed as a foil to the good-natured dork that was Howard Phillips. As Nintendo Power's editors quickly discovered once Phillips left the company, they attempted to carry on the comic with just Nestor, and the result was utterly disastrous and was phased out within the year. But somehow, despite all of this, Nintendo said, yes, our final tentpole release for Virtual Boy should be a game about this defunct character no one actually likes. Honestly, this whole thing rates right up there with Waterworld in terms of a game representing a perfect synecdoche for the entirety of Virtual Boy's existence. In terms of gameplay, Nestor's presence honestly doesn't matter. He's just a dude who bowls, and his female counterpart, his twin sister Hester, made up for this game, amounts to a tiny and trivial nod to inclusivity. So what do Nestor and Hester accomplish here besides put a character who would have been vaguely familiar to Nintendo fans on the box art? Well, they serve as punching bags, basically. When you bowl anything less than a perfect strike, you're treated to an animation of your avatar having a minor meltdown. Me, when I bowl, I'm happy to end up with any result that isn't a split or a gutter ball. But if Nestor or Hester missed a single pin, they respond with anything from a look of disbelief to a sudden onset of alopecia. Occasionally, you'll see random animations that don't involve the main characters. What all these images have in common is that they're kind of weird, and they're all drawn a bit amateurishly. So, basically in summary, Nintendo dredged up a failed character from a defunct feature in its in-house propaganda magazine to star in a bowling game for its failed semi-portable console specifically for the sake of kicking him around when players failed to bowl perfectly. Frankly, I can't imagine a more inexplicable licensing decision, or a more fitting capstone to the Virtual Boy. Next time on Virtual Boy Works, the common denominator between America and Japan, it turns out, is Russia?